We are honored to be joined by a friend and a colleague, Congresswoman Barbara Comstock. Barbara represents the 10th Congressional District of Virginia, which is the Northern Virginia area. Barbara's been a real leader on veterans issues, done a tremendous amount of work there. Also on legislation involving safe communities. As we've seen a rise in gang violence, especially gang violence related to MS-13 gangs, Barbara's been in the forefront of writing legislation, getting legislation passed, getting it signed into law, addressing those issues. And also, Barbara's been a real stalwart, too, in making sure that we have a tax system that helps families, that benefits small businesses, that gets capital back to where it needs to be, has been a real leader there, and also, too, been very, very active in making sure that there is the proper balance in the regulatory realm. I think she understands as well as anybody else how a balance in regulation is key for our small businesses to grow and the things that they need to do. So Barbara's been a real stalwart there, and I am honored to have her on the show this morning. So Barbara, thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning. Great to be with you, Rob.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity.
We've been busy all August getting around the district. You know, it is our work period in the district, so it's always great to be able to get out and just visit with people where they live, where they work. Now we're back to school, so kids are getting back to school, seeing a lot of, exciting, education opportunities going on across the district, too.
Sure. Well, listen, tell us a little bit about how those visits have gone. And I know that recently you're very proud, as you should be, of the Safe Neighborhoods bill that addresses, how do we combat this gang violence, and as you know, in your district, significant, and it's been something that has been a big issue through the years, and your bill goes a long ways in bringing a lot of different elements of law enforcement together to not only address it but also to find ways to prevent it. So give us things that are happening there, and then how that has been connecting with your travels and efforts through the district.
Sure. Well, thanks. Well, as you know, because I know you're a co-sponsor, my project, Safe Neighborhoods legislation, was passed and signed into law back in June. And we really developed this because I had been working with our local law enforcement and, the Northern Virginia Gang Task Force, that I know met with you and me and Jerry Connolly and Don Beyer, and told us of their real concerns about the dwindling resources at the end of the last administration, and how they were seeing the gang resurgence since about 2014. People had come over with that border surge, and they needed to be able to combat that in a very comprehensive way. So the Project Safe Neighborhoods bill that we did provides money for community policing. So it's first, community policing deals with gun violence, curbing gun violence, has Project Exile, which goes after, criminals who aren't supposed to be buying guns when they try to. But then it set aside 30% of the money to deal, to address these gang task forces and established task forces that are out there already, but to replenish them so they can battle things like the MS-13 problem that we have in the Washington metropolitan area, but very much in Virginia. And, I know you were talking to the Police Benevolent Association the Wednesday, like I was.
Yes.
And an officer who was there told me down in Albemarle County, they have a murder that they have, resources that they are having to put on this MS-13 murder. So it was one guy who was murdered, and of course they target their own community. So it was somebody from either Honduras or El Salvador was here that they targeted and killed, but it was 4 people involved in it. One of them was from Manassas, and this isn't, this is in the Washington metropolitan area where there are an estimated 2,000 or more, but they are spreading out all over, so that this police officer very much knew the kind of the detailed work that has to be done, how difficult it is, and he knew they needed those resources. So, it was very, it's continuing. Whenever I talk to our local law enforcement, our sheriffs, our police, people there on the ground, we hear about this problem. And last summer when we had done a ride-along with ICE and with our local law enforcement, we saw in one night where they picked up 4 people who were MS-13 or suspected. One of them, they pulled up their record while he was sitting there, and he had been in jail in El Salvador for murder when he was 16. He was 21 or 22 now. He had been deported twice from our country. Here he was on a Friday night at 6 o'clock in the middle of a busy mall shopping center in Sterling, Virginia, where kids and strollers and moms and dads are roaming around having no idea that this murderer was amidst them, and might be in their high schools, because he looked so young. He could have said he was 16 himself, and they wouldn't have known. So the Project Safe Neighborhoods bill now gives resources to those task forces so that they can be in our schools, protect our kids, make sure these gangs aren't getting a foothold here, and most importantly, get the gang members out of our communities, out of our neighborhoods. And that is a huge difference between me and my opponent this fall. She opposes another bill I have that I know you've already voted for, which is to simply say it's Criminal Alien Gang Removal Act. If you are an MS-13 gang member and you're here in this country, you're not going to stay here. You're not welcome to come in the first place. So if you come to the border, sorry, we turn you around and send you back. That's not a refugee situation we're going to deal with. But if you're here, we're also going to send you back. This is such a simple bill. Every single Republican voted for it, and 11 or 12 Democrats, including 4 members of the Hispanic caucus, all Democrats. Yet my opponent attacks this bill and refuses to understand the core of the problem are these MS-13 members who are here preying upon their own community. And I know you hear about it, as do I, from those communities. And I say, well, do you want to, would you talk about this publicly? They're afraid to do it because they know they would be targeted. And so they'll talk to you about it, but they don't want to be public because of the fear they have, because they go in. Sometimes, if you don't talk about them, maybe they just shake you down for money. But they live in fear, and that's why we want to certainly get them out of our communities and, not have any more of these brutal, in Albemarle, that was a machete killing. That's these are usually knife killings, group killings, very brutal beatings. We just had one in Leesburg that they finished prosecuting recently, and that was a brutal killing. And then you have somebody like a fisherman in Albemarle who finds this brutally massacred body, and this just has no place in our country. So thank you for your support on this, Rob. And, it's bipartisan legislation, and I think that's the difference that I think we're going to see this fall. My opponent, who couldn't even be bothered talking to the Police Benevolent Association. I actually saw your opponent down there when I was there walking in. She had the interview before me. But my opponent couldn't even be bothered talking to the Police Benevolent Association, who were, talking with us about, their endorsement and deciding who they were going to endorse. And my opponent didn't show up to the national nights out that we have, where we were me and my staff were at a dozen or so of those, and she didn't show up at a single one. So wow. My opponent is someone who kicked off her campaign with fake cops in her ad, but she doesn't really want to engage with the real ones and the real crime issues we have in our community.
Well, Barbara, as you know, public safety is one of those basic governmental responsibilities, and you're exactly right. Folks in elected office at every level, local, state, and federal, have an obligation to make sure that we keep our citizens safe. And it's just common sense to say where these threats exist, as you point out, with MS-13 gangs, with these thugs and criminals, wherever they may be, every effort needs to be made to seek them out, to keep them either out of the country, to incarcerate them here for their efforts or for their crimes, and to be strong and unambivalent about what we're going to do to prevent that. And I appreciate your leadership there. You have been in the forefront supporting our law enforcement community and the efforts that they have. And today it's very challenging in the law enforcement community, but making sure that they have the tools necessary to provide that safety net for citizens. Again, the most fundamental responsibility of government is to keep its citizens safe and to find every opportunity to do that. And when you have these heinous individuals that are committing these brutal acts against others, we have to do everything possible to make sure that we're keeping citizens safe. And you've been outspoken on that. You've been in the leadership role on that, have been unafraid to jump in and tackle these issues, both by putting legislation out there, but as you point out, traveling to communities, talking to law enforcement officers, talking to parents, talking to children, talking to folks that are most affected by this and most concerned about this. I mean, Barbara,
and you see how much the gentleman from Albemarle talks about. It was costing them $250,000 already for the investigation. Resources that are being put on one murder, and we're happy they are doing everything they can to bring that murderer to justice. But let's have that person out of the country in the first place. And this issue this is an issue I've been aware of because Frank Wolf had worked on it for so long and worked with you on it before I was in Congress. But when I was in the State House, I had a local Fairfax County officer come to me because it was on the human trafficking issues that I was working on, and he pointed out that they were seeing MS-13 gang members involved in trafficking because that's how they were getting some money and resources. So they were getting these young women into gangs, but then also trafficking them. But they didn't have a strong enough statute to go against them. So I worked with, that's why you want to talk to, meet with your local law enforcement and work with them. And so we developed legislation that I passed when I was in the State House to increase the penalties on human trafficking for gang members. And then we've also, we worked with a whole bipartisan coalition on these things. So, these solutions are bipartisan, but I think as we're seeing these days, people want to, instead of being focused on bipartisan results like this, all they want to do is resist. And they don't even show up to, work with local law enforcement, hear what's going on. Today I'm meeting with our local Loudoun sheriff and a couple of gentlemen who are on the show Narcos, who are actually real-life narcos, worked to get drugs out of this country, and talking to them about some of the international issues because we want to also stop the flow of drugs. And it's moved a lot from South America up to Mexico now, making the border security issues even more important. And I know you and I have supported that, and so it's we continue to have a lot of challenges on that front. But thank you for your leadership too.
Well, listen, I appreciate what you do, and I know you're so active in traveling throughout the 10th District on a number of issues. One of the places also where we've crossed paths, Barbara, has been on the efforts to support and take care of our veterans. And as you know, Virginia is now, as far as its veteran population, has the fastest growing veteran population of any state in the union. And because of the military bases here, because of the Pentagon being right across the river, we have a large number of veterans in the state of Virginia. Great thing for the state of Virginia, a real asset, but also a responsibility for us to make sure that those veterans are taken care of. And you and I both recently supported a new effort to help our veterans called the VA Mission Act, which goes a long way to make sure that veterans have access to the care that they need, that we break down the barriers which before had been, impediments both impediments and making things less convenient for veterans. This is really going to open things up. We now have a new Secretary of the Veterans Administration, Secretary Wilkie, who I think has a great background, will come in and really hit the ground running. But I want to get your perspective because you've done so much too there in the region. We know today we have over 800,000 veterans that call Virginia home. and we know the sacrifices that they've made. And I want to get your perspective, because you've done a lot there to make sure you're focusing on veterans and making sure that they're getting the things that they need, and making sure that all of us are there supporting them.
Oh, exactly. And today we're having a Veterans Job Fair, which we do annually. So we are going to be able to share with them a lot of the information, like about the VA Mission Act that you talked about. We also were able to open a Veterans Center in the center of the district, Leesburg, because my district people had to go up before to Martinsburg, West Virginia for treatment, or down to Alexandria, and we didn't have something sort of in the heart of the district where people could go and get services. So we now have that Leesburg office, which, we have already heard from many of our veterans how just having that opportunity to be closer to home, to not have to have that long travel, makes a big difference. So we were thrilled to be able to, in 8 months, work with, our local folks in the VA and get that stood up. And we really had a lot of great leadership from our local veterans on that. And we are also, in addition to the number of legislation that we've passed, we've been able to also, we're co-sponsoring a bill, I think you may be on it too, which is to take a model program that's being used at Boulder Crest in my district, which is in Bluemont area, Western Loudoun area of my district. This is this wonderful private veterans retreat that brings veterans and their families at no cost to them. So this is free to their site. They have these beautiful cabins that are wheelchair accessible, where they can fish, they can ride horses. It's just all kinds of therapies there. And one of the therapies they've developed is called the post-traumatic growth therapy. And this has been a sort of phenomenon that they've developed with wounded warriors. And it's this is a whole program for veterans, by veterans. Ken Falk, who owns the property, who took his own property and developed it into this wonderful veterans retreat, has really been at the forefront of healing our wounded warriors, making sure they're getting the treatment they need. And this treatment that he has been working with is, I've just met veterans who I've seen how it's turned around their lives. So we'd like to get more pilot projects using this his programs and get them all around the country, certainly get them all around Virginia. He's opening another retreat in Arizona, so both people from any part of the country can come to this retreat, but I'm certainly a great advocate for people knowing about this. We also have another retreat down in Prince William that you may be familiar with too. Again, it was veterans who founded it, and it's Serve Our Willing Warriors. And it's the same type of program where veterans can bring their family members and or whoever they choose to bring for that week or that stay when they're there. And they have people there helping them in whatever way they might need. And again, really trying to make it a healing, restorative event. And really moving story one time with a veteran who had planned out, he's coming there with his family. He was going to have that week there. And he had actually planned after that week that he was going to commit suicide because he just couldn't take it anymore. But he didn't, it wasn't, his family had been supportive. It was just, he was having such a tough time of it. But after that week, this was at Serve Our Willing Warriors, he changed his mind. And so how wonderful, what a wonderful gift that was there, but also that he understood the community of support that wants to help our veterans. Not just places like this, but there is a whole community of support. And I think, I know that's what you've worked on doing, and this has been, something we've all worked on to make sure that everybody in the community can help, because so many people want to. So it's finding these ways in all of these various service organizations that we have around the Commonwealth, certainly here in the 10th District. I mean, we have our American Legion Auxiliary that is constantly working with our veterans. I have a wonderful woman in my district, Anne Moran, who they make quilts for the wounded warriors, and just kind of putting all kinds of things about their service on these quilts. And so when they come home, this is something they sort of want to shower them with love, blanket them with love. And it's just a beautiful thing that the women have done. And so they've been a wonderful service organization to work with. But, we could both start listing them all, and I'm leaving out dozens and even hundreds who serve our veterans. And so I'm thrilled that we're always, this is certainly in the State House, every year we're working to make the Commonwealth the friendliest place in the nation for veterans. And I think we've wanted to continue that in Congress and continue that with a focus on our veterans in Virginia, but throughout the entire country.
Well, Barbara,
and stay with the Veterans Job Fair. I know we have Monster.com there. We have Northern Virginia Technology Council. We have, again, I'm slating the dozens and dozens who will be there to help. I'm pretty sure Boulder Crest is going to be there too. So we have so many people who will be there to help our veterans, and more who couldn't be there but are available. Mm-hmm. So we're excited to have that program once again this year.
Well, listen, you and your efforts to provide these opportunities for veterans has just been stellar, and putting an event together like you're having today is really that connector that everyone needs, so that veterans know what's out there. Many times, veterans have needs and they're not quite sure about what's out there. So having this opportunity for veterans to come together and really understand that and see what's there is really critical. And that's, another way that you have, through the years, reached out and made sure that veterans communities are getting the things that they need. So really appreciate your leadership there. I know the veterans in your district really appreciate that, because that's going way above and beyond what exists today, and really saying, hey, listen, I'm going to make sure that we bring all of this information to our veterans. So, Barbara, thanks so much for your leadership. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. I appreciate all that you're doing. I wish you all the best in what I know is going to be a busy time back there in the district, and I look forward to seeing you on the road or back in Washington on September 4th.
It's been great. We have a busy day here today, and weekend, and it is always great to get around and see everybody. And we'll be hard at work in September, making sure we pass that budget and make sure we keep things going. Like we've been able to fully fund the military. Thank you for your leadership on the Armed Services Committee to make sure we did that. You may know recently the governor's staff. The finance secretary was asked, well, what do you attribute this sort of surprise $550 million surplus that we have in the Commonwealth? And I appreciate that Aubrey Lane was honest enough to say, well, a lot of it has to do with that we have the defense spending that we have now, which is obviously first and foremost good for our national security, but it's also good for Virginia, where we're a leader. Yes. But also he cited the tax cuts. So together with rebuilding our military and strengthening our national security and strengthening our economy at the same time. Even our Democrat colleagues in the State House understand that peace and prosperity are a good thing, and now we have that $550 million surplus. And as you know, not a single Democrat voted for that tax bill that is now getting us that 4.1% growth. I think that small business optimism that we've had, which is rivaling. I said it's the highest since 1983, Morning in America time. So I'm excited when I see our manufacturers, our small business leaders, and how it's a great time for people to be growing their businesses, investing in their people, giving raises. I met with business leaders this last week where in the construction industry, they said they were providing 6% raises. I see Democrats talking about there's been no raises. I don't know who they're talking to, because I hear from people, like I'm sure you do, who've gotten bonuses, who've gotten raises. And because there's such a low unemployment rate, people with that expertise and talent are in the driver's seat in terms of wages. And if they don't have that expertise and talent needed for the workforce, we have these workforce development bills that we're working on, but also that are already in place, where businesses and government are going to help them get those skills so they can get higher wage jobs. So I'm excited about where things are going with the economy, and we'll keep it going, and we need to keep this Congress in Republican hands in the fall so we can keep this
Absolutely.
peace and prosperity agenda going. So thank you for the opportunity to continue to work with you and our leaders in Virginia, and we'll see you in September.
Sounds great. Well, thanks again, Barbara. We really appreciate you joining us this morning.